What does it mean to have hereditary priests, and what can we use with that information today? We're going to talk about that and other topics here on Wake Up to the Bible. I'm Daniel Kaplan. I'm here with my father, Dr. Kaplan. Together, we're going through the books of the Bible, Genesis through Deuteronomy, over the course of this year, reading a little bit every day. Today, we're reading Exodus 27:20 through 28:12, and I'll be reading from the Robert Alter translation.
I would like to make a comment before Daniel begins to read from the law.
Okay.
My son is involved with a network, a discussion network, and I was rather appalled. I saw a comment the other day. Somebody said that whenever he speaks about the law, somebody jumps in and says that Jesus Christ abolished the law. Well, I wonder if that person ever read Matthew 5:17-18.
That's the always go-to text. So go ahead, give it to us.
Do not think that I came to destroy the law of the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till all is fulfilled. So he says, think not that I've come to do it. So people think that he came to do it.
Yes, because they reinterpret fulfill. They make
right.
fulfill into a dissolving of the law, which is not abolishing the law, because the law is always there, but we just don't have to worry about it, so it's a different point.
I see. Okay. Now, moving right along. All right.
You just come, yeah. Anyway, yes, Matthew 5:17 is like the go-to, whatever you want to call it, pronomian, legalistic, whatever text that people always pull out. And then there's always a good comeback for it. It's not like they've never read it.
Of course, yeah.
All right. So, what were we doing again? Something in Exodus
20.
before you rudely. No, I'm just kidding.
27,
20 and 28:12. All right. As for you, you shall command the Israelites that they take you clear oil of beaten olives for the light to kindle a light lamp perpetually in the tent of the meeting outside the curtain which is over the ark of the covenant. Aaron with his son shall lay it out from evening to morning before the Lord, an everlasting statute for your generations, incumbent on the Israelites. And you bring you forward Aaron your brother and his sons with him from the midst of the Israelites to be priests to me, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar, the sons of Aaron. And you shall make sacred garments for Aaron your brother, for your glory and for splendor. And you speak to every wise-hearted person whom I have filled with a spirit of wisdom, that they make Aaron garments to consecrate him to be a priest to me. And these are the garments that they should make: breastplate and ephod and robe and checkwork tunic, turban and sash. And they shall make sacred garments for Aaron your brother and for his sons to make him a priest to me. And they shall take the gold and the indigo and the purple and the crimson and the linen, and they shall make the ephod gold, indigo, and purple, crimson, and twisted linen, designer's work. 2 joining shoulder pieces it shall have at its 2 edges and attached, and the fastening band that is on it shall be of the same fashioning, of 1 piece with it, gold and indigo and purple and crimson and twisted linen. And you shall take 2 carnelian stones and engrave on them the names of Israel's sons, 6 of their names on the one stone, and 6 remaining names on the other stone in the order of their birth. Lapidary work, seal engravings you shall engrave on the 2 stones the names of Israel's sons, encased in filigree of gold you shall make them. And hold on, I want to see where I'm going. I think one more verse. And you shall set the 2 stones on the shoulder pieces of the ephod as remembrance stones for Israel's sons, and Aaron shall carry their names before the Lord on his 2 shoulders as a remembrance. All right. So we've got a lot going on here in terms of specific instructions, particularly on the attire of the priesthood. But one thing that I wanted to bring up was just this notion of a hereditary priesthood in the first place. Now, from what I understand, if you look at what was commonplace within religions of the era, is that the way that you would establish priesthood was more of popularity, of politics, democratic sort of thing, and God specifically goes against that and establishes that this is a hereditary priesthood. You can't buy your way into it. You can't talk your way into it. You're either it or you're not. What do you think that we can kind of get from this concept of this sort of system?
Well, the way you put it, it does indicate that ministry is even now a calling, a choosing, and however a congregation chooses a minister, but they need to keep in mind there ought to be the fruits there that if they're going to somehow select a minister, they need to really make sure that they see in that person the indication that that's what he ought to be doing. It should be a very careful decision. If it's not done, depends on the organization how they handle it.
Right.
But if they're going to handle it in a more let's say democratic or egalitarian fashion, they should be very, very careful in how they handle it.
Yeah, no, it's understandable. I think there's a couple of things that I think of when I think of this, and that is there's a separation between the people that are called to be like the servants and the other people. So, for example, I'm not saying I'm not making any broad statements like that would apply to. Well, I'm making broad statements, not something that necessarily apply to every individual. But I would not generally expect that somebody that is called to be a leader spiritually would necessarily be a leader otherwise, because the Levites certainly were not. They were scattered. They didn't have a lot of political clout exactly. They had a specific sort of role, right? So you would not necessarily I guess what I'm getting at is sometimes people might be skeptical of somebody and they're like, well, who are they to tell us, the wisdom of the world when, have they really gotten very far in business, or are they very well regarded in their community from a political sort of situation? Are they very popular? And I would say, that's probably not what you would even expect, because there was a distance, in the Levites and the other people. What do you think? You know what I mean? Because you're talking about applying it to a modern time. I know that I've actually had the opposite thrown at me. Let me kind of go further. I've had the opposite thrown at me because some people are down on the idea of a full-time minister, because they'll say, well, how can somebody get up there every week and tell us, the right way to live your life when you haven't been down in the trenches, and you haven't, you're not getting your arms greased or whatever, you know what I mean? When you don't have the elbow grease and you're not doing that, it's just going to make you really comfortable and distant. And to some degree, I'm not sure if that's actually wrong.
It's almost unbelievable. Ministers, ministers.
But I've gotten that. I'm not making this up, and not just from one person.
They visit. I remember anointing a fellow that fell from a building.
Uh-huh.
He could have died.
Right.
I anointed him, and he was healed. I realized that physicians had their role to play, but ministers visit people in the hospital. They visit bereaved families. They deal with people who are having emotional problems. They're counseling couples, and they live also. They have their spouses. They have their children to raise. They have their house to maintain. They have their vehicle and their appliances and whatever to maintain, and all the rest of it. They're doing a job just like it's like a teaching job. Or it's. I'll tell you, there was a rabbi, and when he went to the Soviet Union, he didn't want to call himself a rabbi, so he called himself a self-employed social worker.
Right.
All right, but that's what it's just as much a legitimate profession as any other.
Yeah.
I'm appalled by those kind of comments. What kind of ministers do they think they're dealing with?
Well, I think to some degree they are dealing with ministers that are not good social workers. But that's the issue.
Yeah,
the issue is you might have appointed somebody to the job of social worker that isn't cut out for the job. And to your point, that's something you need to look for, right? You need to look for essentially genetic predication, like, you know what I mean? You want to look for somebody that naturally fulfills the role, and not look for somebody that is necessarily persuasive, not necessarily look for somebody who's particularly great at, amassing a following. These people didn't have to do that. They were just good at it, right? So to some degree, I think we need to take a step back sometimes with who we appoint. Because what I see in the religious community is I see a lot of appointed leaders that get there because they're good at the kind of skills that would make somebody maybe a good business manager. But that's not the same thing as being a good minister, right?
But Aaron was eloquent.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, to my point, I've talked about it before on this podcast. Aaron, in some ways, was so compassionate and so empathetic that you could argue he went too far with the golden calf incident, and maybe that was also why Moses thought of why God used him as the more persuasive speaker was because he was not quite as tough as Moses in some ways. But in some ways that was a detriment. But on the other hand, you could say that was a detriment, but yet this family is continued to be used, right? So you're right. There's something to be said about that as well. I'm not saying you have to necessarily take the reclusive, socially awkward person and say, well, they obviously are the minister because they are so peculiar, and I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that what I often see in terms of who we're promoting to ministry and who we're promoting to leaders doesn't quite reflect what I think is the intention.
There's probably a lot of hucksters out there, frankly.
Mm.
Anyway,
Well, I think there's a lot of well-intended people, but I think there's a difference between being well-intended and being good.
I'd like to mention that Israel was a theocracy,
Right.
so the Levites did have in a sense a political role. For example, they were judges, and judges are very important, as we've seen in
Yeah,
our
morally.
in
Yeah.
our society.
Hmm.
Judges can
That's
can
true.
very critical.
That's true. If you kind of think of them, that's a good point. It kind of goes against what I said, but it's a good point. If you think of it as like the checks and balances, they were kind of like that judicial branch, as it were. Yeah. They were the moral hammer to be like, no, you can't do that. Yeah.
The candelabra is something to comment on, and
Yes.
I guess we'll come across it again later, but uh, it is symbolic of the nation, and olive oil, as you know, is symbolic of God's Spirit.
Hmm.
Jesus Christ was in Gethsemane. That was at the base of the Mount of Olives.
Right.
The olive tree is symbolic of the church, and
Yes.
he was in Gethsemane, which is the olive oil press area.
Hmm.
It's where the olive oil was. So olive oil was all around him as he prayed before his arrest. And so there's a lot of symbolism there. And the candelabra had 7 branches, but it was one stem, and it's symbolic of the fact that God worked with one ethnic group anciently,
Yep.
Israel, but there were 7 stages of his working with them, as you can see through the Bible. I won't go into that today. But on the other hand, in the book of Revelation, in the 11th verse of chapter 1, there's 7 separate candlesticks because the church in Revelation is not based in one ethnic group, but through history it has proceeded, from one group to another. So it's a different situation, but you still have the 7 candlesticks in Revelation as well, just but individual rather
Right.
than in one. But I wanted to mention some of those things. And the modern state of Israel, of course, uses the menorah, the candelabra, as the symbol of the nation, just as the United States has the eagle with the arrows
Olive branch.
and the olive branch. Right? The Israel has the menorah as their
Yeah.
national symbol with olive leaves on either side.
Right.
That comes from Zechariah 4. So just to
Yeah, yeah,
comment on
yeah.
that.
Now, one thing about this, where it says kindle light perpetually, this is a custom that you will see synagogues do often. Is they'll have a light that is
And
constantly
have the near tamid,
right,
the light that keeps burning.
right. It's about the only custom that's left. That's continually done because they feel like that's something that they can appropriately continue because a lot of these are specific to the time and place and conditions and whatnot. Now, that being said, what would you think if a congregation from with a whatever you want to call it holistic Bible perspective, what would you think? Do you think that a congregation should feel that that's a good tradition to keep up, or does it really matter, or what?
I wouldn't think I wouldn't think that necessarily needs to be done.
Yeah.
I would like to comment
I
though.
will say, if you want to be negative about it, you can get a little mystical about it. I know, like theaters do it; they call it the ghost lamp because they believe that if you have a light on the stage, it's better, and there's a kind of a superstition about it. And so, yeah, that they're obvious. Just like anything else, there can be negative.
Just out of interest, since you brought it up about synagogues,
Uh-huh.
Orthodox synagogues will have a six-branched menorah because they don't want people to think that this is the temple. It's not. But the more modern branches of Judaism will have a seven-branch menorah in the sanctuary now.
A six branch menorah. So
In the,
how does that work?
be,
It's just three, three, and nothing in the middle,
I mean, it's been a long
or it's
time
just
since
six across even.
it's a long time since I
Okay.
saw one. No, I think it's just nothing in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and because they want you to know that
Right.
this is not the temple.
Right.
Or sometimes also people now apply it to standing for the 6 million that were martyred in
Uh.
recent history. But
Right.
in the more modern synagogues, you will see a seven branch menorah. And let's put it this way: if you go to a Lutheran home in the old days, I know I'm kind of old, and I parked my horse and buggy outside. No, I'm kidding. But in the old days, if you went to a Lutheran home, they like to have these folded hands in
Mm-hmm.
prayer, some kind of like a wooden sculpture in the home.
Yeah.
If you went to a Jewish home, you normally find as a symbol, you find a menorah. There's also the special
Hanukkah.
Chanukiah,
Yeah.
the Hanukkah menorah, which has nine
Nine
branches for
branches.
another reason. But aside from that, in many Jewish homes, somewhere in the home, you'll find a seven-branched candelabra as a symbol.
Mm-hmm. That's one thing that's interesting about the way that this is brought up is olive oil. Um, it is interesting that this is even brought up here because the question is can they even fulfill this command at this point? Robert Alter claims no, because he says this would have been something that they would not have been able to really take with them from Egypt. It's not very likely. And also, it wouldn't have been likely to obtain it in the wilderness. So, this is kind of a retroactive command put back in here that will be applicable later. That is how he interprets it. Um,
I'm not sure that you couldn't have had caravans coming in and selling it to them.
Apparently, it was incredibly expensive, specifically this clear oil that is spoken of, because usually clear oil. He says cloudy oil would be used for burning, and clear oil for culinary purposes. It's kind of the same thing now. If you're going to light a lamp, you don't use the extra virgin olive oil sort of stuff, or even cooking. You usually don't use like the extra virgin olive oil. You use that more like for a dressing where you're consuming it. You tend to use the lighter stuff because it's less expensive. Apparently, according to him, sesame oil would have been the more common one to burn for candles. So this is, at any rate, what's going on in terms of this clear oil for olive oil is again pointing to this, the best of the best. This is something that you would almost think of as wasteful. And that's something to keep in mind. And I'm going to jump on that a little bit more in just a second. But do you have anything else to say about oil?
Yes, they brought a lot of wealth with them from Egypt.
True.
I still
So they could have purchased
I
it,
still
maybe.
maintain it's not impossible, but
Yeah,
the main thing is that these are instructions ultimately that they'll have to carry out perhaps more effectively when they actually enter the land.
right.
But remember that initially they weren't supposed to be there 40 years in the wilderness. By the next
Yeah,
year, in the summer of the next year, they sent the spies out,
fair enough.
and so
So
but
it could be that they had enough until that point,
but
and then at that point maybe they couldn't carry out that command, and that's actually a point that they couldn't carry out the command perhaps in the wilderness, right?
yeah, that's possible.
Okay. When it comes though to the best of the best, and things like that, you get that again, in my opinion, with a lot of this, the way that the attire is talked about, right? These are not cheap materials, so again, it's not like the monks, where they're in burlap sacks and very modest. This is almost ostentatious in terms of its um, display, and we need to be careful about that because I'm going to kind of riff on it a little bit. I do find that sometimes people get a little bit pious about what they expect from a religious presentation. I know that people will get hot and bothered about people using technology that's very, outrage, very provocative and exciting, or maybe the way that the minister is dressed. They'll be like, well, should they really be in that? fancy of an outfit or something like that. And I would say you got to be careful with that, considering, this example. This example is not that the priesthood was supposed to be this super modest external display.
But on the other hand, there's another side to that story.
Sure.
There's a tremendous amount of pageantry, but it's focused in one location.
Right.
The idea that we have in certain, well, let's say the Orthodox tradition, the Catholic tradition of a local priest with various vestments,
Hmm.
and no, I think the Protestants have it right there. That the local church shouldn't have all this pageantry. I mean, that's different from good quality clothing. I don't mean that, I'm just saying this concept of incense and a lot of ritual that was focused in one location. It wasn't intended to be everywhere. In fact, God condemns in the Bible local shrines
Hmm.
where sacrifices were going on locally. It should have all been focused in one place.
Fair enough, but the question is now that there isn't that central place, what do you do with that? Should we still have one?
Well, that the sacrificial system anyway has is now in no, we shouldn't, because it was supposed to be in one central place, and that place right now is not unavailable. But even if it were available, it's not something that Christians have to worry about.
But you don't.
Jesus Christ is our sacrifice.
I guess what, yeah, fair enough, but I'm just getting at, you think that something about humanity fundamentally changed, that whatever value we could get from this sort of ritual is completely gone, that there is no analog for the modern
No,
era?
that there should be some ritual. For example, you have the what we call Remembrance Night,
Hmm.
communion, which I think is an annual thing.
Right.
We have that. We have
Fair.
baptism. We have the baptism is a
Right.
ritual.
So let's say the people want to make their baptismal font, or whatever you want to call, whatever, the place where you do baptisms, like really elegant looking. I
No,
wouldn't say that's
no,
bad.
I no,
Or what if you want to use really fine china for Remembrance Night? Again, I would not think that's
no,
bad.
that no, of course not. What
Well,
I'm
don't say of course not, because sometimes my point is that sometimes people will get pious about it, and they'll be concerned about ostentatious displays in relation to religion. So that's what I'm getting
That reminds me of a very brilliant teacher of mine, Dallas Willard. Some of you may recognize the name. He spoke to us once about the I think it was called the Bumper Mennonites.
at. Uh-huh.
In Pennsylvania, there are various Mennonite groups, and the idea is keep it simple, keep it humble, and even your car, you can't have too fancy of a vehicle and so on. And I do disagree with that. And
Right. There's a
say,
balance there.
I would say that Jesus Christ very likely had a very good quality garment because they were raffling it off. Now, maybe it was just superstition. They felt like, well,
Uh-huh.
this holy man had this garment, we're going to raffle it off. But you get also a very possible idea is that it was a very good quality garment that he had.
Hmm. Right. I guess, I mean, and then this gets back to what I was saying a while ago in terms of like how nice your sanctuary should be and things like that. And I think we just need to be careful. I think there's a certain amount of, yes, these sort of displays within religion, it can bring about judgment. You can look like you're not being a very good steward of money. You can
Right.
look
Yeah.
you can look bad. But on the other hand, I don't think the concept of Christian modesty means that any sort of display of beauty or quality is negative. You've got to find that balance.
Okay. Fair enough.
All right. Anything else that you get out of this section before we move forward?
Well, there's going to be a lot more detail, so
There's going to be a lot more
we should
detail.
probably press on.
All right, so let's press on. And if you haven't pressed on, please like, subscribe, hit the bell. It's a great year to read the law, so let's do it together.